Welcome to Farm to Market, featuring an in-depth look at how the Canadian ag industry and Canadian farmers alike are faced with a variety of challenges in an ever-changing liberal Canadian agricultural landscape. Now here's your hosts, Carl Krebs and Harry Siemens.
Joining me tonight is my good friend and veteran ag reporter, Harry Siemens, of 53 years. Harry has seen a lot of things in the 53 years that he has been covering the ag industry, whether it's the pork or the chickens or the cattle or the crops in the field. Harry's seen it all, and we're going to have him on the show here, and he's going to be a regular. And we've got some really exciting news tonight, some breaking news, actually, from one of the largest food processors in Canada, Maple Leaf Foods. And to bring us the news, let's welcome Harry Siemens to the set right now.
Hey, what a privilege to be on with you from Sylvan Lake, Alberta. And can I just mention why we're here?
You know what? If I can do that, Harry, I want to lead off by saying I have never in all my years in phone calls made ever phoned anybody on their honeymoon. So congratulations to you, Harry, you and Angela on your honeymoon in Alberta. And I'm very happy for both of you.
I appreciate it very much. And we've had just a wonderful time, wonderful weather. But one other comment to make, I've been 53 years in the farm journalism, broadcast, farm advocate business, but I also grew up on the farm and I farmed with my father starting back in 1965. So I had, and Dad already farmed 1,200 acres back in that time. And so he was a seed grower. He taught me a lot of things that I still look back at in wonder today. So just wanted to make that point clear that I'm not just a city boy gone broadcasting. I'm a farm boy that went broadcasting right off the tractor cab into the radio studio.
Well, let me add to that. You can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy, right, Harry?
It's, you know what? That's right. But at the same time, there was a time when my nephew, Jonathan Siemens, asked me to come and take a ride on the tractor in the new air seeder. And he wanted me halfway down the field. I'm already sick and tired of it. You know, I love agriculture, but I didn't like being cooped up in that cab. He says, "Can you go another round, Uncle Harry?" I says, "No." I said, "I got something really urgent pressing in Alberta."
Yeah. Well, you know what? As I said at the outset, you have seen a lot over all these years that you've been covering, and you have some very unique perspectives on it. And I think what the intention of this program, folks, is Farm to Market is here to give some context to the text. You are observing and seeing food prices rising in the market. We're all faced with the same challenge. How are we going to afford the food that we need? The three things in life are food, shelter, and clothing. Food, and along with the other two, are slowly creeping out of our reach. And what we're trying to do here with the assistance of Harry is bring a little bit of understanding to what's driving it. Because for sure we know, as you said many times, the producer is a price taker, not a price maker. So we have to understand it from their perspective. And the things that are changing, the things that are impinging on their ability to do that job are no doubt driving prices. And so we've got some exciting news. I don't know which one you want to lead with, but I think we want to talk about the big announcement by Maple Leaf Foods. Why don't you lead with that one, Harry, and tell us what they had to say, and then give us a little bit of context to it.
Maple Leaf Foods, their news release says, is to unlock value as purpose-driven consumer packaged goods business, spinning off its world-leading pork business. And we know that in Brandon, Manitoba, we have the largest pork processing plant in all of Canada. You know, they do about 80,000, 85,000 pigs a week over there. And so that's the first thing. Here's the release also says they're now creating two independent public companies, each with a sharper focus to execute its own growth strategy and pursue its uncompromising commitment to best-in-class sustainability practices. And so, number one, yes, they are very, very important to the pork industry in all of Canada, so to speak, but especially for producers in eastern Saskatchewan, all of Manitoba. And so it's an interesting time where we're headed right now. The other thing I'd like to say that we have, the top farmers in the world, here in Western Canada, obviously in Ontario and so forth. But at the same time, we need exports. If we don't have the exports, we sometimes export to 75, 80% of what we produce. That's what keeps our farmers in business here. So at this point, what Maple Leaf has said they're going to do is they want to focus more on the U.S. market as far as the pork is concerned from Manitoba. So it's one thing, and I posted that on Twitter yesterday, and I got some feedback, and the feedback was, number one, we're hoping that this is all good, and it isn't spinning it off into something that will not be what it is today. So at the same time, and then the other part of it is that their release talks a lot about protein, and protein, of course, pork has been the number one protein in the world. And
Okay, can we break that down a little bit, because the use of the word protein would imply that something's going to be added to the pork, which has all been pork up to this point. So not trying to get ahead of it and not trying to put words in their mouth. We want to be responsible in what we're saying. What do you see as protein, and how far can you go out on that narrative, Harry?
It's one thing, you've all seen the non-meat burgers, and those are made out of what we call plant protein. And you know what? I have nothing against plant protein, but number one, when they were starting to use it as in place of, still calling them burgers, but non-meat burgers. So where they're going to be headed, and all of this has to do with the so-called climate situation. Livestock is something that the people that are pushing climate change down our throats are saying livestock is a big challenge for the climate. And so a lot of these companies are going towards the world market where they're going to be going into protein, plant protein. And that's the concern I have. They haven't told me that, but I did see protein in their news release. So that's the thing.
Right. And then using the word protein could imply any source of protein, and we're not sure what that protein would be. Like when we say pork, we've always known it to be pork. We know where the pork comes from, just like we know where the beef comes from, or the poultry, the chicken. But we're talking about protein as in what is this going to be the source of that protein. So I think consumers have a right to at least sound the first alarm and say, where is this taking us? And you know what? Maybe that's the perfect segue into the next story, which you're following closely, about what's happening overseas. And tell us about that story that's breaking, because that has some real implications.
Which one are you referring to now?
I'm talking about the carbon tax being imposed on the cattle producers in Denmark. Yes.
Yeah, and to make a long story short, first of all, protein comes from all kinds of crops, peas, beans, edible beans. But in Denmark, they're so concerned about cows, destroying the climate. So by 2030, they have now made a law that every cow will be required to have the producer pay $100 in carbon tax. And I can get into much more detail. Yes, it is unbelievable. And people will say, well, what's he smoking now? What's he talking about? This is real stuff. I mean, I'm getting this from people, that are absolutely concerned about what that will mean. Paying $100 carbon tax per year per
animal.
Per animal, absolutely.
Well, and Harry, you know what? It's a short line to draw between that statement and that kind of policy, which is obviously going to affect the producers to either drive the price of the product further higher than it already is, or put the producer out of business. But either one is catastrophic to the fact that we need meat. We are meat eaters. We are consumers of meat. So where are we going with this? We're going into a state of, it's demonizing the cattle industry. It's demonizing the cattle industry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But when you look at the larger picture of those people that are really focused on putting livestock production for food out of business, and that's really the key. And so I'm here advocating, and I'm talking to people, off the record, on record, and so forth. Where's all of this going? And the biggest challenge, and today, even with Maple Leaf, should Maple Leaf cut back on their pork production and making it more efficient in their minds and so forth? That means we got less producers, and so what happens eventually, even with we got another thing coming, and then the industry did this themselves, and it's a good thing. But by 2029, in Canada, all sows will be loose housing. And that means that the cost.
Can you put what does that mean, Harry, when you say loose housing, for our viewers to understand? What does that mean?
Loose housing means that the sows will only be in a crate very short time, and so when they're weaning, when they're birthing and weaning, and the reason they have crates is to protect the weanlings, right? I mean, so now they've had to develop a system whereby they can still keep the weanlings together after a certain number of days, and then have the sow. So what happens is it takes a lot more space, and you can raise fewer sows. Efficiency and the cost. You're going to have to revamp. You're going to have to build new. And as one person told me today, Bill Ilford, who's the general manager of Hams Marketing out of Headingley, Manitoba, he says there's not every producer will want to expand and build a new barn, because you build a barn today, you're starting at $5 million to build a new hog barn. So it's a lot of changes that are taking place. And people say, well, that's the hog industry. But you know what? The producer who grows grain and feed grain, it goes to these hog producers, right? So
absolutely. You affect the number of producers, you affect the supply that's needed to it. And the basics of any economics plan is supply and demand is going to determine price. Where the demand is high, the price goes up. Where the supply is short, the price goes up. If these policies come to fruition and the producers are in the tight spot that they're going to be in, it's going to inevitably force some of them out of the market. Those that are sort of maybe barely hanging on, or doing it maybe just because they've always done it, almost like a habit, are going to look at it and say, you know what, my land is worth more than all of this aggravation. And then it starts that spiral where they start to, get out of the business. Again, the supply goes down, the price will go up.
Totally. And that's the concern that some of us have. And so right now, getting back to Maple Leaf, I'm hoping that they're going to be able to continue on with their plant in Brandon. Secondly, this carbon tax on cows, it sounds like a fairy tale. If we had somebody had told us this 2 years ago, we would have said, what's going on? But that's reality. And then you mentioned just before you came on the air, and I had sent that to you, in Australia. There's this one particular radical council in a particular city wants to go vegetarian. And,
right.
And right now we have a plant in Denver, Colorado. It was a chicken plant, a processing plant. They made it illegal to process within the city limits of Denver, and so they have to close. And there's other stuff. There's other propositions in the United States that are becoming really radical, because the Supreme Court was they let the Proposition 12 stand in California, and so now we're seeing other people come out of the woodworks. In fact, there's one proposition that somebody showed me, is that they want to make it illegal to kill any animal for food. And
isn't that something? There's a reoccurring theme, a couple things that are reoccurring in what you're saying, and I'm sure you're aware of it. But for our listeners, I want to bring it up up to the forefront, and that is that we talk about climate change, which are the people behind the climate, and the policies and the legislation that's being put forward to make it increasingly difficult for producers to stay in the business. Can there be any doubt that this is an attempt to change everything about those industries and bring it to their knees?
Yeah, and the other thing that's happening is that they're trying to, you see this on the chemical side, where they're able to get some of the crop production products out of the marketplace for whatever reason, and they're hitting at places where the efficiency of producing food, is going to be tougher and tougher, and the less efficiency, the more it costs. And so I've been there and done that, as I said before, with my father. My brother still farms, and with the price of, we could talk, till the cows come home, but to put in a crop of wheat, it's around $450 an acre. You take a farmer with 1,000 acres of wheat and you multiply that times 450. That's what it costs to put the crop in. Corn is much higher, $650 an acre. So the cost of doing business, and I just talked to one fellow today, a combine, a John Deere combine, whatever it may be, $1.3 million, and the tractors just as much, and so forth. So it's really an interesting time. I keep staying in it, and I keep watching exactly what it is that's happening, and that's why we want to continue to do this show, so we can tell people what the trends are, what's happening, and so forth.
Right, and as much as we'd like to, to set the context to the text and try to understand it, a lot of this is well beyond the control of certainly the producer, and if it's beyond the producer's control, then it's beyond our control. For us who bear the price, who go to the market and have to pay the prices that we're paying at the market, is to try to understand what's driving it. And somewhere between the producer and the legislation that he has to deal with and the rules that are constantly coming in, and then the people that are determining the price that the producer gets, we end up at the other end of that having to pay that price. And I think it's important that we make our listeners aware that the producers, as much as we, are seeing, producers that are very successful, large scale farming operations and so forth. But if this is to continue, folks, what you're hearing from Harry is going to make an abrupt shift to the left. This is going to be a tectonic shift that I don't know where it's going to lead us, but nowhere good.
Here's another one. I'm not sure if you saw the link or not. Ottawa's decision to ban open net pen salmon farming in BC by 2029 is a reckless move that endangers thousands of jobs and exasperates food insecurity. And Ottawa's fisheries minister, Diane, and I'll say the name next time, punched the torpedoes away button with her announcement last Wednesday, where Canada will ban open net pen salmon aquaculture in BC. And that's something that those people are really, really concerned. They could hardly believe their ears that this is something that they could actually do.
Okay, so what we're talking about is salmon farming, right?
Yep.
And of course, this employs, as people may or may not know, a lot of Indigenous people are employed in that industry. And I read the numbers that were quoted in that article. That's significant. So once again, it seems to be an assault on all facets of the industry, because when these rules are coming in, and I got to say it, some of these people are making these changes who are unelected, but at some point they are under the authority of elected officials. The question is, how is it that this thing is getting so wildly out of control? How is it that all of these industries are somehow being demonized? And the effect is going to be catastrophic to us. Our food supply, if you think, folks, you're paying a price now, you're going to pay a far higher price as this starts to roll itself out. And that's a huge...
I just want to have one more quote, but the Canadian Aquaculture Industry Alliance ripped it as irresponsible, unrealistic, unreasonable, and unachievable. And those are the kinds of things when we start hearing $100 a year carbon tax on a cow, whatever it may be. We're seeing it on our propane. You were seeing it on our gas. Like farmers, I told you, you said it before. They're price takers, not price makers. And so anything that gets tacked on as expenses, it goes all the way down the line. And so you may think that some of these things we're saying are crazy, but you know what? They are crazy, but they're true.
You know what? All of this stuff, when you put it in and give it just a gentle stir, is causing a lot of us to resort to what they call us as conspiracy theorists. But it's no longer a conspiracy when the reality is manifesting itself. So what we're seeing here has been telegraphed, I think, many, many years ago. And the point I started to go on to a little while ago is the reoccurring theme of climate and the climate change people. If we bring this down, Harry, if we were to reduce this to the lowest common denominator, we're putting this at the doorstep of the climate change people, those people that are driving the climate fear porn in the market.
Totally. And that's where all of this is going. And even Maple Leaf Foods, they, as I said to you before, they consider themselves as carbon neutral. And so that's where some of this plant protein business comes in, because, and so, yes, a lot of things are going to continue to change. And the other thing is, we got farmers in Canada that are average age is 58, 59 years old. And so we could talk about the capital gains tax that went up 16% as of June 25th, and what that will do to, giving, handing your farm to your children. All of a sudden, in some cases, you always have to sell something. And somebody will say, well, yeah, they're rich to begin with. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the tax, from, how the capital gains tax makes it, especially with the price of land the way it is today. Those are huge numbers.
Right. And let's not forget the people that are buying up large plots of land, like Bill Gates, who owns when he was running Microsoft, he was constantly in front of the trades commissions over having a monopoly. This guy now has a monopoly on the farmland in America. And it seems to be like nobody's blowing the whistle on that one. He seems to be able to buy up all the land. And when a person like that, who we know has shown himself to be who he is, you got to know that this is going to drive an agenda that people aren't going to like. That's not healthy for a country. It's not healthy for an economy. It's certainly going to play itself all the way down to the producers. And in previous shows, you and I have talked that the producer is far better able to care for his land than any government agency or bureaucrat will ever do.
Totally. I mean, we have the as I said before, we have the top producers in the world right here in Western Canada, and they look after the soil. They look after the environment. They look after the animals. They look after the crops. Why? Because of the efficiency. If they mess around with those kinds of things, they for sure won't make any money. And so they have to look after all of that. And so, yes, I'm so proud to be part of what my good friend Orion Samuelson used to say, agriculture, the basic industry, renewable resource. Wow, what a privilege to be part of it.
So in your travels, as we started out talking about why you're on the road and so forth, I know you would not drive by a single crop field and not take notice of it. What are you seeing for crops? Because we have had an inordinate amount of rain this year. I think when we talked a few weeks ago, you were saying somewhere in the 150 to 200% increase in rainfall this year. What are the crops looking like as you travel across the country?
Genetics and crop, the way they put the crops in, all of that is improved. But Ange and I took a trip last week, Tuesday, from Winkler to Neepawa. And I kept remarking to her, I'd never seen so much water over such a large area. Some of the crops were great, but then you'd get into an area where there's water. And so right now, when I look at Manitoba Agriculture's crop report, you know, we're really wet. In a lot of places, we're really wet. Ian Smith at Argyle, you know, he wants to get out there and do some haying. He can't get out there because it's just waterlogged. And even farmers are concerned. I saw pictures today of the big.
Yeah, something I noticed as well, traveling down into Wisconsin and Iowa, coming across the Dakotas, Minnesota, lots of flooded farmland. And the picture that you sent me a little while ago of I-29 being flooded at Council Bluffs, I don't know if I've seen that forever, but I did see the Mississippi, and it was wider than it's ever been. As I crossed over it coming into Iowa, I couldn't believe how much spillage is over the bank. So we have a lot of water. You know, there's a lot of people thinking it has something to do with cloud seeding, but I don't want to go there on this program. But we know that the atmosphere has been affected.
Yeah, but at the same time, as I say, we drove on Sunday, Monday. We drove from Winkler to Sylvan Lake, and there's a lot of good crops along the way. So are we, you know, good, fair to average is probably a good expression, especially when we're used to, you know, good to really good. So we have to wait and see. The crop, you know, comes off, starts a lot of time beginning of August. And so we'll see. We're not that far away from the earlier winter wheat and winter cereals, which they start to, you know, they're in the soft dough stage. I mean, they're making seeds, you know, like, and so, you know, we need heat, we need heat units, and keep the rain away for the time being so that we can get all of that, what is out there. But you know what? There's a lot of crops that didn't get planted, a lot of acres. Talk to, you know, especially north of Winnipeg, where they were really getting used to having great crops. One Hunter Red Colony told me yesterday 3,000 acres didn't get planted.
Just too wet, underwater. Yeah. So, I mean, those are effects as well. And just to summarize what we're following here, I think the Maple Leaf story is something that we're going to continue to report on as it develops, because I think that has some very significant impacts. But the thing we're giving here, folks, is we are talking about the global things that are happening. We're certainly well outside the sphere of Canada and our local markets when we talk about these ridiculous policies going on in Australia, you know, the cows being taxed in Denmark. But, you know, here's the part. Why are we saying this, folks, is because it inevitably comes here. We're living in this time where what is happening in other countries somehow eventually makes its way here. So with the assistance of Harry and his broad scope and his resources, we can tap in and say, hey, did you know? And do you care? And how is this going to affect us? You know, I don't know if we're going to have an ability to affect it. But one thing I know is at some point, we're going to be electing people, and they have to know that these things matter, that these concerns are big deals. They're not small things. They have huge implications down the road. So, Harry, great show. Thank you for sharing. Final words to you, my friend.
Yeah, it's great, and I'm looking forward to doing this on a regular basis. And somewhere, somehow, sometime, I will see you again. That's Siemens Says.
Thank you, Harry. God bless you. Enjoy the rest of your honeymoon. Say hello to Ange.
I will.